Modals and dialogues have always been kind of a pain to use in the web, from handling it in a user experience way or handling it from the logical or the code side. Now, there are many different ways that people handle displaying modals, even inside of the Vue community. And sometimes there are different recommendations or different libraries. For example, Vuetify or Element UI might have events that the modal is listening for to display or not display on the screen. Other libraries might use a simple v-if statement, and you pass a boolean whether or not to show that modal on the screen. And handling the hierarchy, code sharing, multiple modals, or even the CSS styling for modals has always been a little bit finicky. So now there's a new Vue component called Teleport, which can be used to simplify the handling of modals in Vue applications. I want to note here that this used to be called Portal, and there was a third-party library where you could use this in Vue 2 applications. But now with Vue 3, there is a new Teleport API that you can use directly from Vue, so it's built into Vue 3 now. It basically allows us to keep a logically consistent component hierarchy while still rendering elements where it makes the most sense. And you will see this in a second when I show an example. It's also easier to handle multiple modals now, as well as the CSS and events that are associated with modals. Personally, as a professional developer working with Vue applications that are in production and some larger Vue applications, Teleport simplifies the handling of modals a lot for me, and I'm very excited that this is now standard in Vue 3. So I'm in just a basic Vue application right now that I set up via the Vue CLI. So I have the two default views, which are About and Home right now. I'm going to run this application. And you can see it's just the default out-of-the-box application with About and a home page. On this home page here, I'm just going to get rid of the Hello World component just to clean things up a little bit. And I'm going to start with my teleport in this About page. Now, if you go to the Vue 3 documentation, there is a section now on teleport that I'll link below. And you can basically see that it's a tag you can use inside of your template, and you give it another HTML element somewhere else in the DOM, and all of the code inside of the teleport tag will be teleported or moved to inside of the tag, which in this case is body. Now they do have some API docs for this, so you can go to the bottom here and look at the API reference, and it gives you some information on how to use to, and then the second prop that you can pass in, which is disabled. So you could pass in a Boolean value to say whether this teleport is disabled or not. And that's pretty much it for the teleport API documentation right now. They'll probably be adding new features as new minor versions of Vue 3 come out. So to get started using teleport in the application, I'm actually going to go into my HTML, my index.html file here. And this is actually how I am going to be handling all modals going forward if I am starting a new project. So I'm going to create a new div, and notice this div I'm creating is outside of my Vue application. So my Vue application is getting injected inside of this div with ID of app, because that's where I'm telling it to mount my Vue application in my main.js file. So Vue itself isn't handling anything outside of here, but I will have another div outside of my Vue application, and I'm just going to give this an ID of modals for right now. And I'm going to be using this div, which will always be available on my screen because it's outside of my Vue application. So even my router and nothing else is affecting this modals, which will always be rendered on the screen since I only have this one HTML page. So if I go back to About, I can add teleport here. So I'm going to do a teleport tag. And by the way, Vter and other Vue tools don't recognize these new tags yet. I think autocomplete and all that stuff will come soon. But anyway, I'm going to just add something really quickly in here. Let me add a div. and say hello. And now I want to teleport this inside of my Modals ID, or the div with the ID of Modals. So I'm gonna put 2 here and then hashtag Modals. Of course, if you look at the docs, you can see you can use an ID or a class or an HTML data attribute. Just anything that's unique, basically, that's specifically a home for whatever you want to put there. But you shouldn't be using just a plain HTML tag like an H1 or something. Okay, so now this should be injected inside of Modals here, and let's see if that works. So I'm on the home page here. Let me go to About. And you can see when I navigate to the About page, it displays the content that was inside of Teleport. And it puts this hello. I'm going to inspect it. And you can see that the hello is actually inside of the div with ID Modals, which is outside of the Vue application. And then I can just display anything I want to inside of Modals here and have set styles and events and everything that I want, handling the modals that are inside of that ID. That also works if you want to use multiple modals. So just real quick here, I'm going to add a second teleport to, and hashtag modals. So it's going into the same element. And I'll close teleport here. So let me actually put modal number 2, close the div. In here, instead of hello, I'll put modal number 1. And now back in my browser, you'll see at the About page, it does indeed render these 2 modals, or these 2 divs for right now, inside of the ID of modals. So you can do as many as you want inside of there. Now, what if I want these to appear and disappear? So real quick, I'm just going to paste in some styles to actually make these look more like modals. I made this modal class just with a couple styles to center it and just make it into basically a box in the middle of the page. I'm now going to add this modal class to a wrapper div and say modal. I'm going to change this into an H1 div. Okay. And now for the second modal, I'm going to add a second class in here. You'll see what I will do with that in just a second. So basically the same thing, changing this into an H1, so it's a little bit bigger inside the modal. And now you can see that the modal shows up on About and disappears on Home. Of course, because there is no teleport tag on the home page, so when About leaves the screen, when the About component leaves, there's no more teleport, so it disappears. Which means that all of the components that were rendered inside of the teleport tag are also unmounted and no longer appear on the screen. Even though they were teleported into a completely separate DOM element, they are still controlled by the hierarchy of the Vue component that they are in. So if that Vue component is unmounted and no longer in the DOM, then the teleported items will not be there either. It's not actually because modals disappeared, because you can still see, the div with ID modals is always on the screen in perpetuity. So go back to About. And now you can't see the other modal because they're both the same size. So just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to style this second modal a little bit differently. I'm going to come down here and do modal 2. And let's just change the height and width. So I'm going to change the height to 200 pixels and the width to 500 pixels. So the other one is 300 by 400 and this one will be 200 by 500. I'll also give it a different background color. Let's say that this one is blue to contrast it with the gray. Okay, so now you can see modal 1 and modal 2. So now, how would you optionally display or hide something inside of a teleport component? Remember, in the API, there is also disabled here. So let's see what that does in our component. Now you can see that only the second modal, the modal that's not disabled, is inside of this div with ID of modals. Then why is the other modal still showing up and why isn't it in modals? So it's actually because we disabled teleport. So now the modal is showing up normally in the component tree where it would be if we hadn't used teleport. So I can actually find that modal just nested inside of the app here. And you can see that now the modal is just inside of the about page instead of actually being teleported. It's just as if we never used teleport in the first place. So how do we optionally show or hide modals? So we can do it with a couple different methods. The first and easiest way we could do it is with the v-if directive and try putting it directly on teleport here. So we could do v-if and then we'll create variables for these. So modal 2 and this one will be modal 1. Okay, I need to put this in a v-if and then I'll get rid of disabled here. Okay, now I need to create a script tag down here above the style and below my template. So I'll create a script with these variables on it. And I need to return an object, do modal 1, which will be false, and modal 2, which will be false also. So now I have these two variables, and let's see how it works if you put the v-if directly on teleport. So you can see right away that they don't render at all because the v-if is false. So let's add buttons here to toggle the v-if. Open modal 1 and then open modal 2. And now I'll put an event handler. So when someone clicks on the button, I'll say @click, change the variable modal 2 to true, or actually let's toggle the variable modal 2. So I'm just going to toggle it to the opposite. Change this to toggle modal 2, toggle modal 1, and let's say @click equals modal 1 equals not modal 1. Okay, so there are some buttons to toggle the opening and closing of the modal here. And I'm actually going to get rid of this H1. So the buttons are near the top of the page here so that the modals won't cover them for right now. So you can see here I have two buttons, toggle modal 1, let me get rid of this, and toggle modal 2. Now, by putting the v-if right on the teleport, it's working fine because the teleport renders or it doesn't render. However, now you can see the behavior isn't exactly what I want. It is supposed to close this modal, but it doesn't close, it just kind of moves behind modal 2. And then I can't turn this one off, and now I'm on another page and they're still displaying. So why is this doing that? So this isn't actually the correct syntax, and I've tried this out in a few different ways. So this introduces some bugs with routing around the application and displaying these teleported items correctly. So I'm actually going to remove the v-if from here, paste it in here, and then I'm going to do the same thing down here. And now if you know how v-if works, v-if will not render something to the DOM if it's false anyway. So you still won't see these divs in the DOM. It's not just about hiding and showing like vshow. v-if actually doesn't render it at all. So this is actually the proper way to do it. And let's check it out in the browser. Go to modal 1, show hide, modal 2, show hide, modal 1, modal 2 on top, modal 1 again, hide modal 2. Now it works correctly. And now if I navigate to the home page, it doesn't show. The modals will close properly. So just remember to put the v-if on the actual DOM element and not on teleport itself. And as you can see from the teleport API, that's why it doesn't have v-if listed here. It only says to use 2, and then if you want to disable teleport functionality and not teleport the item, optionally you can use disabled here. and it will do exactly what I showed you earlier. If you're using any other directive, you should put those on the actual elements that you are passing in to the teleport tag. Another thing to note here is that you can see our v-if logic. All of this logic works just like it would in our regular Vue application. So we are logically putting the modals inside of this about component, and you can see handling it. We can handle any data, method, events, anything we want to here inside the component. But then as far as our rendering tree, we can put these wherever it makes sense also. With our logic, it might make sense to keep it inside this component, and then our rendering tree we can put anywhere we want in the application. And speaking of the rendering tree, so we actually don't have to put a div with an ID of modals inside of our index file here. We could actually put that in any component really. So inside of our app component, for example, I could put a div here with an ID of, let's just say, test container. And now let me copy that, make sure I don't misspell anything. In the about page, I'm just going to say this second modal. I'm going to now put it inside test container, reference the ID. And you can see if I go here, toggle modal 2, it still appears, and just the same way. If I go to app, and let's say I move this test container div, let me move it to about down below here. And now you can see just by me moving the tag, now I have this warning pop up. It says failed to locate teleport target with selector test container. Even though it's in this component, but because when teleport is looking for it, it hasn't rendered to the DOM before this component loads. Basically, whatever element you are teleporting this to should already be in the DOM before this about component ever loads. So it should never be in the same component or in a child component. And of course, if you hit toggle here, then it comes up with this error that can't find the node. And you can even see in the warning here, it says the target cannot be rendered in the component itself and ideally should be outside of the entire Vue component tree. So the pattern that you should use is to put a div with ID of modals here, or whatever div you want in the index.html. I don't think it's a good pattern for the most part to teleport to any other place that's inside of your Vue application. So in my applications, at least my larger applications, for Vue 3, I'm setting them up somewhat like this. So I will have a target container for modals, and then I'm going to have one for messages for any alerts that pop up on the screen. And then as I need other target containers, I will probably put them here as well. But these are the two that I'm using for now. I'm keeping all of my modals inside of here, and then I'm keeping all of my alerts or toaster notifications or whatever inside of messages. I just use the terminology messages because it's from another library that I use, but I could probably just use notifications or something there as well. Now, as far as how to handle modals in your application, they're handled so many different ways, but I think the easiest way is just like it's doing here. There's no reason to complicate it more than it needs to be. So I think a simple v-if for showing or hiding modals is all that you need, unless the library you're using already defines some kind of way to handle the modal. And as more and more libraries get updated with Vue 3, I'm going to make more videos about how to use those libraries with Vue 3. But I couldn't show an actual modal component library right now because not many libraries have been updated to work with Vue 3 yet because it just came out. So if you have any other specific questions about modals, please leave them in the comments below. If you want to know more about Vue 3 in general, or discuss coding, Python, JavaScript, just anything, you can join my Discord channel, and I chat about coding every single day on there. So thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for a lot more videos on Vue 3.